My name is Lauren Whitaker, and this is my story. It began on a cold November morning when the papers were signed, and my marriage officially came to an end. My ex-husband, Bradley Cole, walked out of that courtroom in Denver, Colorado, with a confident stride and the same smug smile that once made me believe he could fix the world. I, on the other hand, walked out with a hollow feeling that pressed into my chest like a bruise. The judge's voice still echoed in my ears. The court awards primary custody of the children and full property rights to Mr. Cole. I had lost not only my house and my children, but nearly $8 million, the wealth I had built alongside him over 15 long years. Everything was gone in one morning. My lawyers said the evidence against me about financial mismanagement and marital misconduct was too strong to fight. They were wrong, of course, but I didn't know that yet. I only knew the silence that followed. I had no place left except for my late father's house in Albany, New York, an old, creaking place that hadn't seen life in years. So I packed what little I had, got into my aging sedan, and drove east until the Colorado Plains turned into the rolling gray hills of upstate New York. America stretched out endlessly before me, the long highways humming beneath the tires, the country I had once loved now feeling like an endless punishment. Dad's house stood on a quiet street lined with bare maples. The paint was peeling, the porch sagged, and the shutters hung crooked. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting on those same wooden steps, watching him polish his old Ford truck while my mother hummed from the kitchen window. They were both gone now. I stood on that porch again, a 40-year-old divorcee, holding a single suitcase and a box of court documents, feeling as though I had come back not to a home, but to a ghost. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and pine cleaner. The wallpaper was faded, the furniture draped with sheets, and the kitchen clock had stopped at 11:42, the day my father died. I set my bag down in the hall and listened to the sound of the wind whistling through a cracked window. That first night, I slept on an old mattress in the spare room, staring at the ceiling where water stains formed a map of continents I'd never visit. Somewhere between America and Europe, I thought, maybe there was still a version of me who was happy. The next morning, I made coffee in a chipped mug and ate toast standing by the sink. The loneliness was sharp, but it also felt clean in a strange way. No arguments, no lawyers, no false smiles. Just me and the silence. I decided to start cleaning, partly to keep my hands busy, partly to stop myself from thinking about what Bradley was doing with my children. By the third day, I had made it to the back room. The walls were lined with dusty books and old photographs. My father in his army uniform, my mother in her nurse's whites, me as a child with a missing front tooth. The wallpaper was peeling near one corner, curling outward like a secret wanting to be told. I pulled gently at the edge, and a piece came away easily. That's when I heard it, a hollow sound, a faint echo behind the wall. I frowned, tapped again. It didn't sound like plaster. It sounded like metal. Curiosity sparked through the fog that had settled over my mind these past months. I fetched a screwdriver from the old toolbox in the hall closet. The screws around a small square outline were rusted, but after some effort, the metal faceplate loosened and fell into my hands. Beneath it was a small built-in safe, about the size of a bread box, hidden between the wall studs. I sat back on my heels. Dad never mentioned a safe. In fact, he was the kind of man who didn't believe in keeping secrets. But here it was, heavy and silent, waiting. I tried the dial, nothing. I tried the handle, it locked tight. For a moment, I almost walked away. What did it matter? It was probably empty. But something in me, something stubborn, desperate, maybe both, refused to let go. I fetched a hammer and a flathead screwdriver and began to pry at the hinges. The metal was stubborn. My palms stung and my arms ached, but I kept going. Time blurred. It might have been an hour or 3, but finally, with a sharp crack, the latch gave way. The door creaked open with a hiss of stale air. Inside, under a thin layer of dust, lay a small stack of folders, a faded leather-bound notebook, and a yellowed envelope. On top of it all was a note written in my father's familiar square handwriting. This secret has always been my golden card. My breath caught. I unfolded the note carefully. It didn't say anything else. Just that one sentence. Beneath the envelope was an old smartphone, long powered down, with a cracked screen. I brushed the dust off the folders, and as I did, my father's faint scent, cedar and pipe tobacco, rose from the paper. My chest tightened. I sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, surrounded by dust and broken wallpaper, and opened the first folder. Inside were bank statements, photocopied checks, and typed letters, all carefully labeled with dates. My father's handwriting filled the margins. Suspicious transfer, Coal Industries, fake invoice. My pulse quickened. Coal Industries. Bradley's company. My ex-husband's empire. I flipped through the pages faster, my eyes scanning numbers and names. Payments routed through shell companies, invoices that didn't add up, money moving in circles that led nowhere. Each line connected Bradley to a web of fraud, hidden behind corporate paperwork and clever signatures. The second folder was worse. Emails printed out, some with attachments labeled confidential. It was like looking into a dark mirror of my marriage. All those nights he said he was traveling for business, the weekends he claimed to be at company retreats, there they were, hidden in these papers, masked as transactions and false charities. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Tears stung my eyes. My father had known. Somehow, years ago, he must have discovered what Bradley was doing. And he had kept it hidden, maybe to protect me, or maybe because he didn't know what to do with it. My mind raced. Could this clear my name? Could it explain how Bradley had turned everything against me in court? For the first time since the divorce, I felt something like hope. The sky outside had turned gray by the time I closed the last folder. I turned the phone over my hand, wondering if it still worked. I plugged it into an old charger, waited, and after a moment, the screen flickered to life. A passcode prompt appeared. I tried my father's birthday, no luck. I tried mine. Then, on a whim, I entered my mother's old address number, 2417. The phone unlocked. My heart pounded. There were messages, hundreds of them, some from Bradley, some from unknown numbers, and others from my father himself, saved drafts addressed to me but never sent. One of them read, "Lauren, if you're reading this, I hope you understand. I couldn't stop him then, but you can now. This is your golden card." I sat on that dusty floor until long past midnight, the glow of the screen lighting my face. My father had left me not just a secret, but a weapon. And though I didn't yet know it, that night in Albany, alone, frightened, but awake for the first time in months, was the moment my story began to turn. I had lost everything. But now I had something Bradley Cole could never buy back. I had the truth. When I woke the next morning, the world outside was gray and damp. Rain tapped gently on the windows of my father's old house, the kind of slow drizzle that makes time stretch. The safe still sat open in the back room, its steel door hanging slightly crooked, and the folders I had uncovered the night before lay spread across the floor like a battlefield of paper. I had hardly slept, and yet I felt more awake than I had in months. I brewed a pot of coffee and carried it into the back room, sitting cross-legged beside the pile. The smell of dust and old metal filled the air. My father had been a meticulous man, a bookkeeper in Cleveland, Ohio, and his handwriting filled every margin in neat, slanted rows. He must have discovered something years ago and quietly documented it, page by page, number by number. The first folder held bank transfers, long columns of dollar signs, dates, and codes. At first, it looked like meaningless accounting, but as I traced the amounts, a pattern began to emerge. Large payments from Coal Industries, Bradley's company, funneled into smaller businesses that didn't seem to exist. One, Bright Horizons Foundation, claimed to be a children's charity in Charleston, South Carolina, but I found no trace of it online. Another, Northfield Consulting, was supposedly based in Boise, Idaho, yet the listed address belonged to a vacant warehouse. Each document carried my ex-husband's name somewhere in the fine print, sometimes as a signatory, sometimes as an advisor. The deeper I read, the more I understood that my father had stumbled onto a web of fraud and deceit. Bradley hadn't just manipulated me emotionally, he had built an empire on lies. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. I saw payment trails that stretched across the country, consulting fees, offshore wires, even one transfer denominated in pounds sterling, pound 315,000 sent to a partner firm in London that had no staff or website. Every number linked to another, and I began to see the shape of something bigger. This wasn't just a matter of hidden money, it was a criminal network. I needed help. Someone who could verify what I was seeing before I went to the authorities. The first person I thought of was Ava Brooks, a college friend who now worked as an investigative journalist in Portland, Maine. She had a sharp instinct for corruption and a distrust of powerful men that matched my own. When she picked up the phone, her voice was the same as I remembered, steady, warm, and slightly sardonic. "Lauren? It's been forever. Are you okay?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "But I think I'm about to be." I told her everything, the divorce, the safe, the documents. She didn't interrupt until I finished. Then she said quietly, "Do not publish a single word, Lauren. Not yet. Make copies of everything twice. Back up the phone if it still works. Then call a lawyer you trust. This sounds big." I scribbled notes as she spoke, my coffee forgotten. "Who should I go to?" Ava thought for a moment. "There's a private investigator I used in a case last year, Nora Hale. She's based in St. Paul, Minnesota. She's quiet, professional, and hates corporate fraudsters. Tell her Ava sent you." I thanked her and hung up. My next call was to Nora. Her voice was calm and confident. She didn't sound surprised at all. "Send me digital copies," she said. "Don't mail anything physical. If this involves multiple states, you're probably looking at wire fraud, maybe tax evasion. Do not confront your ex directly. And whatever you do, don't tell anyone else." I did exactly as she said. For 2 days, I worked from dawn until midnight, scanning every document, renaming files, and organizing folders by date and transaction type. It felt like piecing together a puzzle that had been hidden for years. The more I worked, the more I saw how deliberate Bradley's system was. Fake charities, bogus vendors, falsified expense reports. Everything designed to look legitimate on paper, but bleed money into his personal accounts. By the end of the second night, I had a full picture of the empire he had built. I also knew why I had lost everything in the divorce. He had used these same forged records to paint me as the one who mismanaged funds. He had built his lies so carefully that even the court had believed him. That realization burned. On the third morning, Nora called back. "I've reviewed the first batch," she said. "Your father must have known what he found. This isn't just shady accounting. This is a prosecutable case. You need a lawyer who specializes in financial crimes." She gave me a name, Ethan Ward, an attorney based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I had never heard of him, but she assured me he was brilliant and discreet. "He's not flashy," she said, "but he knows how to dismantle a liar." I called Ethan that afternoon. His voice was calm and deliberate, like a man who measured each word before speaking. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "I can help you. But first, I need to see everything." He drove up from Philadelphia 2 days later. When he arrived, I was surprised by how unassuming he looked. Dark sweater, weathered briefcase, quiet eyes that seemed to read people faster than they spoke. He took a seat at my father's old kitchen table while I laid out the folders. For hours, he studied them, occasionally asking questions, but mostly listening to the shuffle of paper and the rain tapping against the windows. Finally, he closed the last folder and looked up. "Lauren," he said softly, "this is evidence of large-scale fraud. Your husband diverted corporate funds, falsified accounts, and misrepresented assets during your divorce. If we bring this to the court that issued your settlement, we can reopen the case. And if the evidence is this solid, the U.S. Attorney's Office will take interest." I stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I've seen cases like this. But your father," he was careful. "These records are airtight. They'll hold up." I looked toward the window, at the gray light spilling over the sink. My heart pounded with something fierce and new. hope. Then let's do it, I said. Let's bring it all. Ethan gave a faint smile. We'll start by securing your copies off-site. Then we'll file a motion to reopen the divorce proceedings. From there, we'll let the truth do the work. As he packed up the evidence, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look like a woman defeated. I looked like someone standing back up. That night, after Ethan left, I sat again by the safe, now empty except for the faint outline of dust where the folders had rested. I traced my fingers along the cold steel and whispered a thank you to my father. He hadn't lived to see this day, but he had given me something better than money. He had given me a way to reclaim my name. The rain eased outside, and somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the quiet streets of Albany. It sounded like movement, like change. For months, I had lived as though my life had ended. But as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I knew the truth. It hadn't ended. It had only paused, waiting for this moment, the moment I decided to fight back. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. The day of the hearing in Baltimore, Maryland, began with a cold wind sweeping through the city's streets. I woke in my small hotel room before sunrise, unable to sleep. I stood by the window, watching headlights blur along the wet pavement below. My navy blue dress hung on the chair, freshly pressed, the same one I'd worn to a dinner years ago when Bradley still pretended to love me. Back then, it had been a symbol of grace. Today, it would be my armor. When I met Ethan Ward in the lobby, he looked steady as ever. Dark coat, calm eyes, papers tucked under his arm. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, I said, forcing a small smile. The courthouse stood tall and quiet under a gray sky. Inside, the scent of polished wood and coffee lingered. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my chest as we took our seats. Judge Martha Green, a woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, presided from the bench. Across from me sat Bradley Cole, my ex-husband, with his lawyer Colin Price, a man who seemed to smirk even when he wasn't speaking. Bradley looked untouched by guilt. Expensive suit, fresh haircut, confidence dripping from every gesture. He didn't look like a man who'd stolen millions. He looked like someone who believed he was still winning. Ethan began calmly, laying out the motion to reopen my divorce case on the grounds of newly discovered evidence. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady, we have uncovered a significant body of documents meticulously recorded by Ms. Whitaker's late father, showing deliberate fraud, money laundering, and concealment of marital assets by Mr. Cole. He presented a stack of evidence, ledgers, emails, and the note my father had left behind. Judge Green's brow lifted slightly as she read the first few pages. Colin Price rose quickly. Objection. These so-called documents could have been fabricated. There's no proof they're authentic or relevant to the division of assets. Ethan didn't flinch. The bank statements have been verified by an independent investigator, Ms. Nora Hale, whose credentials are impeccable. She's here to testify. When Nora took the stand, she spoke with the calm precision of someone who had built her career on exposing liars. The financial pattern is consistent with deliberate concealment, she explained. Funds were moved through shell companies, Bright Horizons Foundation, Northfield Consulting, and others. All led back to Mr. Cole's personal accounts. Bradley shifted in his chair for the first time. His lawyer objected again, arguing that these were routine business practices. But Nora had brought copies of records, dated transactions, and even screenshots of Bradley's emails approving false invoices. Every word, she said, made the air in the courtroom heavier. Then came the most damning moment. Ethan handed Judge Green a document, a transfer receipt showing $315,000 in pounds sterling routed to a London firm under Bradley's name, marked as charity donation. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Cole, are you aware that this transaction occurred during your divorce proceedings? Bradley's voice faltered. I don't recall that specific payment. Ethan leaned forward. Perhaps this will help your memory, he said, sliding over an email where Bradley had written, move the funds offshore before she sees the books. A ripple of murmurs filled the courtroom. I felt my pulse in my throat. For the first time, Bradley looked small. His lawyer whispered something, but Judge Green silenced him with a raised hand. She turned to me. Ms. Whitaker, did you have any knowledge of these accounts during your marriage? No, Your Honor, I said. My voice trembled, but I didn't hide it. He told me I wasn't good with money. He made me believe I couldn't be trusted. He said he'd handle everything, and I let him. I wish I hadn't. The judge nodded slowly, her gaze unreadable. Then she looked back at Bradley. Mr. Cole, this court does not take fraud lightly. I am ordering an immediate freeze of all your accounts pending investigation. Bradley's face strained of color. Colin tried to speak, but the judge continued, her tone cool and final. Given this new evidence, the prior divorce settlement is hereby suspended. Custody and asset distribution will be reconsidered upon conclusion of this inquiry. Additionally, these documents will be forwarded to the U.S. Attorney's Office. For a moment, no one moved. The sound of papers rustling and footsteps in the corridor was the only noise in the room. I sat still, barely breathing. Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You did it, Lauren. This is the turning point." When we stepped out into the cold afternoon, the air smelled of rain and victory. Reporters hadn't caught wind of the case yet, and I was grateful. I didn't want headlines. I wanted justice. I looked back at the courthouse steps, where Bradley was standing, his perfect posture wilted. For years, he had made me feel powerless. But that morning, in that cold courtroom, I had finally watched the scales begin to tip back toward truth. As we walked toward the car, Ethan said quietly, "This isn't over yet. But now he's the one on defense." I nodded, the first true smile in months touching my lips. Then let him feel what it's like to lose everything. The sky had cleared a little, light breaking through the clouds. For the first time since my world had collapsed, I believed in something again, not luck, not revenge, but justice. The truth was finally on my side, and it was only just beginning to speak. The months after the Baltimore hearing passed like a storm that refused to fade. Every morning brought new calls from Ethan, updates from investigators, motions filed, and more of Bradley's secrets dragged into daylight. Each revelation peeled away the image he had built for years, showing the truth beneath. Fraud, greed, and lies stacked like rotten bricks. My father's records had done what I never could. They made Bradley's empire crumble. By spring, federal prosecutors in Chicago had taken over. The case had grown beyond a divorce. It was now criminal. Ethan called one morning, his tone sharper than usual. They've traced over $10 million in stolen funds. Offshore accounts, fake charities, falsified contracts. It's all coming down, Lauren. The trial began in late May. The courthouse was modern and cold, the kind of building that seemed designed to remind people of consequences. I flew in from Denver with my stomach twisted into knots. The press had gotten wind of the case, calling it the Cole scandal. Reporters lined the courthouse steps shouting my name, but I kept walking, eyes forward, flanked by Ethan and Nora Hale. Inside, I took a seat in the front row of the prosecution side. Bradley sat across the aisle in an expensive gray suit, his hair too neat, his eyes hollow. It was strange seeing him like that, smaller somehow, stripped of his practiced charm. For years, I had thought he was unbreakable. Now, under the white courtroom lights, he just looked tired. The prosecution laid out everything: the shell companies, the money trails, and the falsified ledgers that had robbed me of my marriage, my reputation, and my $8 million. They showed the court the same note my father had written. "This secret has always been my golden card." The jurors listened in silence. When Nora testified, she explained every transfer, every deception. Funds moved from Cole Industries to shell accounts under his personal control, she said. He concealed assets during the divorce proceedings and forged signatures to redirect payments offshore. Her calm voice was devastating. The defense tried to spin it, claiming my father's files were outdated or that I'd tampered with evidence. But Ethan countered with verified bank logs, phone backups, and the digital fingerprints Bradley had left behind. "These aren't stories," Ethan said firmly. "They are numbers. And numbers don't lie." On the third day, the judge called a short recess. I stepped into the hallway, breathing in the sterile air. The weight of it all hit me then. The months of fear, the nights alone in Albany, the years of manipulation. I leaned against the cool wall and whispered to myself, "You're almost there." When the verdict finally came 2 weeks later, it was swift. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, perjury, money laundering, and concealment of marital assets. Bradley Cole, the man who once promised me forever, was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The judge ordered full restitution of the stolen $8 million plus interest and transferred all property, our Denver house, the investments, even the lake cabin in Vermont, to me and the children. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I simply sat still as the world corrected itself. Justice, slow and relentless, had arrived. When I returned to Denver that summer, the house no longer felt like his. The silence was peaceful now, not haunted. I opened every curtain, let sunlight flood the rooms, and filled them with laughter again. My children, Ella and Jack, came home soon after. They ran through the halls like they used to, shouting and laughing, their voices echoing off the freshly painted walls. That first night, we ate pizza on the floor of the living room. "Mom," Jack said, wide-eyed, "is this really our house again?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "Ours forever." The next weeks were a blur of repairs, gardening, and rebuilding the life I thought was gone. I replaced the porch light, the one that had flickered since before the divorce. I painted the kitchen white, just like my mother's used to be. And in the evenings, when the sky burned gold over the Rockies, I sat on the porch and watched my children chase fireflies. I still kept my father's old safe, but I didn't hide it again. Now it held new papers, clean deeds, honest bank statements, college funds for Ella and Jack. The only old thing I left inside was the note he wrote. I read it sometimes when the house is quiet. This secret has always been my golden card. I understand now what he meant. Not just a secret, but the truth, unbreakable, undeniable, and powerful. Ethan visited once, a few months after the trial. We stood in the garden as the kids played. "You've come a long way," he said. "I had help," I replied, smiling. He nodded, then looked at the sunset. "What will you do now?" I thought for a moment. "Live," I said. "Maybe take the kids to Europe next summer. Show them that the world is still wide and beautiful." He smiled. "You've earned that." Sometimes I still think about Bradley, not the man in the courtroom, but the man I married, the one who made me believe in forever. I don't hate him anymore. Hate keeps you chained to the past. I've learned that letting go is its own kind of victory. Now, when people ask how I managed to rebuild, I tell them the truth. I fought, even when I was terrified. I opened a wall, found a safe, and refused to stay quiet. I stood up for myself when no one else believed me. That's what saved me. Not luck, not revenge, but courage. My life began again the moment I chose to face the truth. And now, every morning, as sunlight fills my home and my children's laughter rings through the halls, I remember what my father gave me. Not money, not secrets, but strength. The kind that lasts. The kind that can't be stolen.